Saw dudes, in my last video I covered a Khora Prime Level Cap test that revolved around melee influence with Roar. That last setup had some major issues regarding energy economy, so this revised round 2 video uses a different loadout that rectifies it entirely. It preserves Khora's outstanding damage while making her more straightforward to use, firmly placing her in a high A tier for level cap content. I won't bore you with any more yapping, so let's get started. The dedicated build video featured the Khora Prime build shown on screen. I used Nourish over Venari for its damage buffing utility and energy multiplier effect. For the aura, I used Brief Respite for the shield gating ability on cast. It was vital to survivability and allowed Khora to chug through bullet hell. Cutting Drift increased the effective range of Whipclaw, Ensnare, Nourish, and Strangledome, though the most important is Whipclaw. Archon Continuity increases ability duration and causes abilities that apply Toxin procs to also apply Corrosive procs. This is great because Whipclaw was modded with Toxin damage this time around. Prime Flow increases the energy maximum to 641 and activates the bonus buff from the melee critical damage Archon Shards. Archon Stretch further increases ability range and provides 2 energy per second for 5 seconds upon applying electricity procs to enemies with abilities. Companions can activate the passive so it can stay on the build and provide value. Equilibrium helps pad out the energy economy with the use of Synth Deconstruct. Catalyzing Shield supplements the shield gating tech from Brief Respite and the following Augur Reach, which is the final increase to ability range and contributes to shield gating tech through its set bonus. Unlike in the last setup, I use Energy Nexus instead of pilfering Strangledome. The 3 energy per second makes spamming Whipclaw incredibly easy, especially considering that Nourish multiplies this up to about 4.8. The final mod is Accumulating Whipclaw, which grants a stacking damage bonus to subsequent Whipclaws upon hitting at least 3 enemies in a single cast, which will decay after 10 seconds. The decay rate is extremely slow, making it perfect for transitioning from one group to the next. As already mentioned, Nourish is used as a viral damage increase and energy multiplier. It is a cheap fix to the aforementioned energy issue, but it's better for raw damage buffing. Another viable option is Lycath's Hunt, but you would be losing out on some damage. The arcane combo I ran with was Arcane Fury for increased melee damage and Arcane Aegis for even more survivability, just like the last video. Arcane Fury increases melee damage on critical hits, which happens often with Khora's builds. Arcane Aegis provides a shield recharge buff, which works wonders with Brief Respite and other shield regenerating mods. It makes Khora effectively immune to all sorts of damage, other than certain damage over time procs like Toxin. Like the last run, I used 1 Tauforge Amber Shard and 4 Tauforge Violet Shards. The Amber Shard reduces the casting speed of abilities, making Khora generally less vulnerable. The 4 other shards dramatically increase the outgoing damage of Whipclaw since it jacks up critical damage. The Whipclaw build achieves over 100% crit chance later on, meaning it can leverage the increased critical multiplier at all times. The buff is further accentuated by Khora's energy maximum being above 500, increasing the amount of brain damage inflicted on enemies. The build for Whipclaw Prime has generally stayed the same. One of the main changes is that a Bane mod of your choice has replaced Organ Shatter. Prime Smite Orokin is a placeholder. Ideally, you want to go into a mission with a Prime Bane mod of the faction you'll be slaughtering. However, you can swap this over to Organ Shatter if you're lazy. The Elemental mod has also changed. Prime Fever Strike grants a ton more damage to the build and heavily weights status procs towards Toxin, allowing Archon Continuity to work its magic. Then there is Melee Vortex, which causes enemies to have a 45% chance of pulling in other enemies when killed while afflicted with a magnetic proc. This saves a ton of time and energy, since Khora no longer has to spam Ensnare. She can instead save it for priority targets and focus on clearing adds. Magnetic procs can be sourced from other weapons, making it easier to proc this arcane. Venari has remained unchanged since the last video. Tech Assault allows her to avoid lethal damage, covering the loss of her dedicated respawn ability. Pack Leader heals Venari with Khora's melee hits and grants Overguard if she's already at full health. Please use the Prime version if you have it. Momentous Bond boosts her damage after Eximus kills, while Aerial Bond slows enemies whenever Khora is airborne. Contagious Bond lets Venari spread status effects on kill, Tenacious Bond adds a crit damage buff to Khora's weapons, and Vicious Bond strips armor with her melee attacks. Linked Redirection adds shield gating for durability, Primed Animal Instinct provides radar and loot detection, and Fear Sense replaces Fetch with a strong multiplicative damage buff that scales extremely well. Venari's Claws have also remained the same. I'm running Assassin Posture to lock down Eximus units, keeping them under control quickly. Maul boosts her melee damage while Bite increases crit chance and crit damage. Radon Claws adds radiation procs for stronger priming, and Swipe extends her attack range. Burning Claws provides heat damage for extra priming and armor reduction, which makes Khora's Whipclaw hit even harder. Bellringer adds impact procs to knock down enemies, and Magnetic Strike builds on that by adding magnetic procs alongside the impact. Finally, Cold to Weak functions like a pet version of Condition Overload, amplifying Venari's overall damage output. Just like last time, I chose to run Cedo Prime. It's a backup for priming and mob clearing, but it didn't see much use during the run. The most crucial part of its modding is the use of primary dexterity, which increases Whipclaw's melee combo duration. It also increases its damage on melee kill, which is constantly happening, making it lethal in all levels throughout the mission. This run used the identical Epitaph Prime build as the last. Magnetic, cold, and corrosive procs still come from the weapon, making it a great primer and catalyst for Melee Vortex activations. Secondary Fortifier allows shots to leech overguard from overguarded units, granting knockdown and status immunity. This covers almost all bases for damage mitigation. This time around, I used Praedos as my melee weapon, with the Incarnon evolutions being Drifting Grace, Shockwave Synergy, Evolved Ascension, and Universal Readiness. This weapon was used as a movement stick and backpack primer with gas and cold procs. However, you will see in the run that it wasn't used at all, and that's okay because Whipclaw exists. For the second companion, I once again used my Panzer Build since I want extra safety. Viral Quills allow for viral priming, Martyr Symbiosis acts as a get-out-of-jail-free card, Panzer Devolution makes the goodest boy immortal, Synth Deconstruct allows enemies that are injured by the Panzer to have a chance to drop a health orb, allowing Equilibrium to regen some energy throughout the mission. Momentous Bond increases its damage and reduces its incapacitation timer. Tenacious Bond adds another critical damage increase, and to be clear, it does stack with Venari's equipped copy. Reinforced Bond increases the fire rate of ranged weapons, and Calculated Redirection allows Reinforced Bond to be active at all times. Prime Animal Instinct and Fetch are quality of life mods. The Claw build is the same as usual. Shocking Claws activates Archon Stretch's passive for energy regen over time, and is buffed up by Nourish. The rest of the build is meant to proc Tenacious Bond or do some decent damage to enemies, but at the end of the day, we're just using Panzer for extra protection. And as usual, I use Madurai as the focus school since it is the best for level cap Void Cascade. Void Strike and Void Fuel were backups in case Khora went down, which did happen once in the run, but that was due to my negligence and talking to my dog. Phoenix Talons was great for increasing the damage of Whipclaw's physical damage portion, and Sling Strength was a straightforward buff to Whipclaw and Nourish, allowing for better damage scaling later on. And as for the amp, I used my standard 147, also known as Assertus Brace, Raplac Prism, and Fat Scaffold. This is the amp I will always use, and I recommend you try it out for level cap runs if you haven't already. I used Magus Cloud, Magus Lockdown, Eternal Eradicate, and Eternal Onslaught as my operator arcanes. Time to talk about the run. This run was incredibly easy compared to the last, and I would usually start with the bad news, then go to the good news, but there was no bad news to speak of. In this case, I'll just go over the run. To start, the energy issues of the first run, with the melee influence loadout, were gone entirely with this iteration. Energy Nexus alone solved a lot of issues with spamming abilities. Combined with Nourish, the 3 energy per second from the mod became 4.8. This is an excellent baseline for providing energy throughout the mission, and allows for Whipclaw spam, unlike the other video. Nourish also provides a ton of energy multiplication for Equilibrium and Synth Deconstruct. Some may argue that Energy Nexus is unnecessary given that Nourish is on the build. However, it would be cutting it close in my case, and I strayed on the side of caution and chose to use Energy Nexus due to the egregious issues of the last run. This time, the damage was primarily done through direct means, meaning that damage over time was not a focus or a concern. The last build used Roar, which was triple dipped in the damage calculations for melee influence. While Roar or a Bane mod will be double dipped for Toxic procs for this loadout, it wasn't really necessary. Using Nourish is entirely acceptable, since the loadout doesn't necessarily rely on Toxin procs to do the bulk of the damage. The raw damage can one-shot most enemies, so using Nourish, despite its elemental damage dilution, is alright. Survivability this time around was also well improved due to the increased KPM and Nourish being included. Most of the deaths from the last loadout could be attributed to excessive enemy swarming because of the energy drought and some really weird spawns. In the latest iteration of the build, Nourish staggered enemies who got hits in, making them less of a threat, and allowing Khora to rebuild her shields and overguard quickly. Whipclaw's damage was fine. I mean, I can say that once it achieved 12 times combo, nothing could stand more than 3 hits. The worst part was building a combo if it was dropped, but that got boring after a while. Ensnare was rarely used throughout the run, but it's a good thing in my book. Melee Vortex did the grouping 90% of the time, since Epitaph applied magnetic procs on enemies. This lowered the number of Whipclaw recasts, and played well in the energy economy side. Ensnare was saved for the super special enemies like Acolytes. Ensnared enemies received 200% damage from Whipclaw and 150% damage from Venari, making Whipclaw delete priority targets even in level cap. Finally, there's Strangle Dome. I primarily use this against choke points to catch enemies and prevent them from swarming me while I took care of purging Exilizers. After purging them, I would come back and spam Whipclaw until it was clear and repeat the process as necessary. It was a very nice and convenient ability, and I was glad that I could use it whenever I wanted to in this iteration. To sum it all up, Khora Prime is one of my top recommendations for level cap Void Cascade. With her energy issues reined in, Khora can stand up to level cap content without much trouble. It is worth mentioning, however, that my use of Nourish, Equilibrium, and Energy Nexus might be considered excessive by some. I would recommend using Nourish and Equilibrium at the very least, but I tend to incorporate extra measures so that I can avoid issues during my runs and keep them smooth for easy recording. With that little tangent aside, I can still vouch for Khora's amazing utility. Her crowd control from Ensnare and Strangledome is amazing and lends well to team play. The biggest issue I can see with her is that she gets boring to play. This is a good problem to have though, and the reason I can say this is because of her oppressive Whipclaw. If it is fully built out, other weapons usually fall short. For the real issues, on the other hand, the only one that I have is her monumental investment barrier. Forma is required in her, Whipclaw, Venari, and Venari's Claws. That's a lot of Forma, and to be honest, it's daunting for newer players. But if you are willing to play the long game, play a lot of Hydron, and farm up the endo and appropriate mods, you won't be disappointed with the results. I hope this level cap video helped. Let me know what you think in the comments. As always, thank you all for watching, and happy farming. Stay safe.